Hello and welcome back. In today's video, I'll be talking about Edmund Emil Kemper III, an American serial killer and necrophile who became infamous for his gruesome crimes committed in the early 1970s. Popularly known as the co-ed killer, Kemper's story is an intriguing case study of when high intelligence intersects with madness and psychopathy. Please don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I'm your host, Greenman, and this is the Murder Encyclopedia. Edmund Kemper was born on December 18, 1948. He was the middle child of 3 children and only son to his parents. His early childhood was marked by a turbulent and troubled environment. He had a difficult relationship with his parents, particularly his mother Clarnell, who was at the same time domineering, verbally abusive, and belittling towards him. She sometimes locked him in the rat-infested basement of their house because she feared he would harm his sisters. At the age of 15, Kemper was already 6 feet 4 inches tall, and his mother viciously mocked him for his large size, deriding him as a real weirdo behind his back. From a young age, Kemper displayed troubling behavior and had a fascination with death and sex. He reportedly killed small animals and mutilated his sister's dolls. At the age of 10, he buried a pet cat alive. Once it died, he dug it back up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. At 13, he killed another family cat out of a twisted sense of jealousy because he thought the cat liked his little sister more. Kemper kept pieces of the dismembered cat in his closet until his mother found it. If it isn't clear by now, Edmund Kemper was not your regular child. His favorite games to play as a kid were gas inhalation and electric chair. The latter was a morbid little game where he would ask a younger sister to tie him to a chair and flip an imaginary switch. He would then tumble over onto the floor, writhing in pain, pretending he was being electrocuted by electric shock. Was this foreshadowing the gruesome end Kemper would meet? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. At the age of 14, Kemper had grown tired of his mother's constant maltreatment and decided to run away from home and live with his now divorced father. He stayed with his dad for a while until he sent him to go live with his paternal grandparents. Kemper hated living with his grandparents in North Fork. He hated it a lot. He described his grandfather as senile and said his grandmother was constantly emasculating me and my grandfather. At 15, Kemper committed his first double murder. On August 27, 1964, he shot and killed his grandparents, Maud and Edmund Kemper II. It all started when Kemper was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother, and they both began to argue about something. The argument left Kemper so enraged that he stormed off and retrieved a rifle that his grandfather had given him for hunting. The rifle had been confiscated because he used it to needlessly shoot animals. He pointed the rifle at his grandmother and fatally shot her in the head before firing 2 more times into her back. His grandmother's last words were, "Oh, you'd better not be shooting the birds again." Some accounts mention that the old woman also suffered multiple post-mortem stab wounds with a kitchen knife. When Kemper's grandfather, Edmund Emil Kemper Sr., returned from grocery shopping, Kemper went outside and fatally shot him in the driveway next to his car. He was unsure of what to do next, so he phoned his mother, who told him to contact the local police. He did so and waited to be taken into custody. After his arrest, he said that he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma, and testified that he killed his grandfather so he would not have to find out that his wife was dead and get mad at him. Kemper's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was subsequently sent to the Atascadero State Hospital, a psychiatric facility. After undergoing psychological evaluation and convincing the authorities that he was rehabilitated, Kemper was released from the hospital at the age of 21. He was deemed no longer a threat to society, despite his troubled history. Unfortunately, this decision would prove to be a grave mistake, as he would go on to kill many more. Kemper's dark desires went beyond just killing. He had a necrophilic tendency and would engage in sexual acts with the lifeless bodies of his victims. After each murder, he would dismember the corpses, keeping their parts as trophies indicating what he had done. He would go on to murder 6 students, starting with 2 teenagers from Fresno State College. Kemper was driving to Berkeley when he picked up 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students, Marianne Pesci and Anita Mary Lucchesa. under the pretense of taking them to their destination at Stanford University. After driving for an hour, he took them to reach a secluded wooden area. Unbeknownst to his passengers, he had long since changed directions from where they wanted to go. It was already too late for them. Describing the horrific events that took place that night, Kemper talked about how he handcuffed the two girls, describing how his hand brushed up against one of their breasts while cuffing them, and he felt embarrassed and apologized. Just minutes later, he would stab and strangle both women to death, locking their bodies in the trunk of his Ford Galaxy and taking them to his apartment. Kemper wasn't done with them just yet. His roommate wasn't home, so he took the bodies inside where he photographed and had sexual intercourse with their naked corpses before dismembering them. He then put the body parts into plastic bags, which he later abandoned near Loma Prieta Mountain. Before disposing of Pesce's and Lucchese's severed heads in a ravine, Kemper engaged in oral sex with both of them. He also noted that he chose these women specifically because they seemed upper middle class, quote, of a better class of people than the scroungy, messy, dirty, smelly hippie types that I wasn't at all interested in. In August of that year, Pesce's skull was found on Loma Prieta Mountain. An extensive search failed to turn up the rest of Pesce's remains or a trace of Lucchese. On the evening of September 14, 1972, Kemper picked up a 15-year-old dance student named Akiko Ko, who had decided to hitchhike to a dance class after missing her bus. He once again drove to a remote area where he pulled a gun on Akiko before accidentally locking himself out of his car. Somehow he got Akiko to let him back inside, despite the fact that the gun was still in the car. Back inside the car, he proceeded to choke her unconscious, rape her, and kill her. Kemper subsequently stuffed Akiko's body into the trunk of his car and then went to a nearby bar to have a few drinks, then returned to his apartment. He later confessed that after exiting the bar, he opened the trunk of his car, admiring his catch like a fisherman. Back at his apartment, he had sexual intercourse with the corpse, then dismembered and disposed of the remains in a similar manner as his previous two victims. Akiko's mother called the police to report the disappearance of her daughter and put up hundreds of flyers asking for information, but she did not receive any responses regarding her daughter's location or status. On January 7, 1973, Kemper, who had moved back in with his mother, was driving around the Cabrillo College campus when he picked up 18-year-old student Cynthia Ann Shaw. He drove to a wooded area and fatally shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. He then placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to his mother's house, where he kept her body hidden in a closet in his room overnight. When his mother left for work the next morning, he had sexual intercourse with and removed the bullet from Shaw's corpse, then dismembered and decapitated her in his mother's bathtub. Kemper kept Shaw's severed head for several days, regularly engaging in oral sex with it, then buried it in his mother's garden facing upward toward her bedroom. He discarded the rest of Shaw's remains by throwing them off a cliff. Over the course of the following few weeks, all except Shaw's head and right hand were discovered and pieced together like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. A pathologist determined that Shaw had been cut into pieces with a power saw. In April 1973, Kemper's killing spree came to an end with the murder of his own mother, Clarnell Strandberg, and her best friend Sally Hallett. On April 20th, 1973, 3 weeks after becoming engaged, Kemper came home from a party to meet his 52-year-old mother sat in bed reading a book. She noticed Kemper enter her room and said to him, "I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Kemper replied, "No, good night." He waited for her to fall asleep, then snuck back into her room to bludgeon her with a claw hammer and slit her throat with a penknife. Kemper then beheaded her, and as he put it, humiliated her corpse. Kemper stated that after he placed her head on a shelf, "I directed my frustration at it for an entire hour. I then proceeded to hurl darts in its direction, each throw a release of my pent-up emotions. Finally, driven by my pent-up rage, I brought down my hand with force, inflicting damage upon the representation of her face." He also cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal. However, the garbage disposal could not break down the tough vocal cords and ejected the tissue back into the sink, making a gory mess. He later said, "That seemed appropriate, as much as she bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years." Kemper hid his mother's corpse in a closet and went to drink at a nearby bar. Upon his return, he invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor Sally Hallett, over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. When she arrived, Kemper strangled her to death to create a cover story that his mother and Hallett had gone away together on vacation. He also stuffed her body in a closet. Afterward, Kemper fled the scene. He drove non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the over 1,000-mile journey. He had 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in his car, and he believed he was the target of an active manhunt. After not hearing any news on the radio about the murder of his mother and her best friend when he arrived to Pueblo, he found a phone booth and called the police. He confessed to the murders of his mother and her best friend, but the police did not take his call seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, he called again, asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He told the officer about the murders of his mother and Hallett, then waited for the police to arrive and take him into custody. Edmund Kemper was arrested and brought back to California, where he cooperated fully with the police. During interviews, he provided chilling details about his motives and the macabre acts he committed. He showed no remorse for his actions, describing his killings in a disturbingly matter-of-fact manner. The most gruesome was his description of how he killed his mother and her friend, which he described in vivid detail. In 1973, Kemper was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. However, he waived his right to trial by jury, opting for a court trial instead. His lawyers argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, using his troubled childhood and strained relationship with his mother as a defense. Despite the insanity defense, he was found guilty of all charges on November 8, 1973. He was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences to be served at the California Medical Facility, a maximum security prison. Despite the horrific nature of the crimes he had committed, it might surprise you to know that throughout his imprisonment, Kemper had been a model inmate and had taken part in various interviews and studies to understand the minds of serial killers. He has shown an interest in helping law enforcement understand the psychological factors that drive individuals to commit such heinous crimes. He's even done his fair share of charity, recording over 5,000 hours of audiobooks for a charity program that works for the visually impaired. The case of Edmund Kemper has had a lasting impact on criminal psychology and the modern understanding of psychopathy. His high IQ, coupled with his depraved actions, has intrigued researchers studying the intersection of intelligence and madness. If you enjoyed watching, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content, because there's a lot more where this came from, here at the Murder Encyclopedia.